Power Hour with John Lee.
Welcome to the Power Hour. Welcome back to the Power Hour. If you are a Power Hour person. Now, if you're not, sort your neck out. Like, share and subscribe. I'm John Lee. I'm the king of everything. And then we've got Johnny Spence doing all the clever things that you see on the screen. Today we're talking about shocking gangsters. So gangsters, yeah, we all know that gangsters have been heavily mythologized and celebrated, in fact, especially in America. So when you think about gangsters for that reason, you think about Americans. Does that mean that America has a disproportionate number of gangsters? I wouldn't say so. I'd say if you went to Russia, there's probably a few gangsters there. And I think there are gangsters all over the world, and maybe they call themselves different names, you know. Maybe the Taliban are gangsters. If they roll through your village, steal what you've got and make a load of money from it, you know, maybe they're gangsters too. But when we think of the Al Capones, you know, these are the people we think of when we think about gangsters. So I'm going beyond that. I'm going to the superpower gangsters, the gangsters that are just outside the norm. So in Manchester, we say, put the money in the fucking bag. And that's the kind of gangsterism you get in Manchester. And I mention that because I'm from Manchester, and people ask, you know, American friends of mine particularly, do you have gangsters? Do you have organised crime in England? Yes, we do. Of course we do. And it's international. How do you get, you know, how do you supply all the junkies with their drugs on a little island like that? You need criminality, and you need to do a lot of payoffs and a lot of corruption just to keep all that sheer quantity of drugs coming in and going out on a daily basis. So yes, we do, of course. And if you try to get involved in that world, bring a gun, yeah, that you know how to handle, because you can get shot and killed, and it does happen quite frequently. And so in Manchester, we've got a gang culture, but you have to look for it to really find it. You know what I mean? It doesn't affect most people's lives. But it's not La Cosa Nostra. It's not MS-13. It's not that level, I would say. But it's too hot to handle and it's too cold to hold. So, yes, we do have organised crime and gangsters and gangsterism in England. Today, we'll see a couple of them later, but I'm looking at the big fish in the sense that they go outside the norm, as I said before. So we'll begin with the obvious. Pablo Escobar. He was a drug trafficker, but he was a gangster. You know, they call it a cartel. But he had a lot of people working for him, and his objective was to sell his product. His product was illegal in the market where he was selling it, that being primarily the United States, but all over the world. And he used extreme force to get that mission accomplished. And he had large numbers of people working for him, nationally and internationally, and even indirectly. You could work for somebody who worked for somebody that worked for Pablo Escobar and not even know it, you know. So what was special about him? Well, he came from Medellin and Cali, you know, the famous cities, obviously, in Colombia for the drugs, but they've improved massively over the last 20, 30 years. So it's not the Medellin as you see it today. It's, 1950s Medellin. And it was rough as toast, as we say. And he was a street kid, not the poorest of the poor, but he was a street kid in Medellin. And he got involved in the industry, you know, picking and packing and chucking it on vans and in planes or whatever. And he worked his way up. Smart cookie, Pablo Escobar, not stupid. And he had a natural ruthlessness that set him apart from even the Cali cartels. He was a bad man, very, very bad man, capable of extreme violence. And he worked his way up and like you would in a company, because they don't even consider it illegal. You know, these guys at the time, they didn't consider it illegal. That was their stock. It was what they sold. Do you know what I mean? It was their produce, and they sold that in a country where it was illegal. But, you know, to people who were buying it, didn't force anybody to take cocaine. Although you could say that they were drug pushers. But yeah, they had a massive market in America and they used it. And And so he became extremely powerful, became the boss of the Medellin cartel, and got together with the Cali boys and formed the massive Colombian cartel, which included the Ochoas. They were very powerful, but the most feared of all of them was Pablo Escobar, the most visible. And he made a lot of money, and he did what a lot of gangsters do. He invested heavily in the local community to garner support from them. And so he built things. He built stadiums, he built schools, I think he built a hospital, libraries, all kinds of things. So a lot of people loved him in his area, in his stronghold. In other places in Colombia, they hated him, despised him. He was a very polarizing figure. But he did a lot. And he did a hell of a lot more than the Colombian government did for those people. And that's what made him popular. He was, a typical Robin Hood type figure. But he would have killed any one of those people. Any one of those people that lauded him and celebrated him. And they still do it now. They go down to the church and they have a Pablo Escobar day and, all this kind of stuff. And, I think he's Saint Pablo Escobar unofficially. And, he'd chop any one of those people up if it was convenient for him or beneficial to him. He would just chop the whole family up, no problem. And that's what made him so scary. And he got into politics because of this, because he had a base. They're all going to vote for him. So he gets into the Colombian Congress, and a lot of the more high class, you might say, traditional Colombian political class rejected him immediately. They knew who he was. They knew what he was. And they were scared of him. And they didn't want him in there. And they did everything they could to get him out. And he called them American puppets, which they probably were. Listen, I spend half my year in Miami. I don't give a fuck what goes on in Colombia. I'll just, do what the Americans want and I'll be all right. So there was a lot of that going on. And Pablo Escobar, I would say, used it to his advantage. But it didn't go very well. And he ended up going to war with the Colombian government. He literally attacked the Colombian government in a military fashion. I mean, he went to town, as we say, in Manchester. He went to town on these people, and they put him in a prison. But it wasn't a prison; it was a luxury complex, custom built for him. He's having parties there. He's having teams of prostitutes brought in. And it was not a prison in any way, shape or form. It was a deal, like a house arrest, but more like a palace arrest than a house arrest. And what's curious to me, in the early 80s, they say, well, he wasn't very powerful at that time. He was powerful enough. When he went to America, he was shipping and heavily involved in massive exportation of cocaine to the United States. And he went to America, and he went to Washington, D.C., right? And he went to the White House, and he had a picture of him, pictures, plural, of himself taken with his son outside the White House. That's not only a big piss take and a middle finger to the American taxpayers, and the American people and the American government. That's a statement. These people are not trying to catch me. I'm outside the White House. I've brought my son. All right, maybe at that time, I'm not the boss of the cartel, but I'm a major player. I mean, and all these crackheads that you're seeing on the streets, they're getting that from me. And I'm standing outside the White House. Piss take. So I think the CIA, DEA, they knew exactly what he was up to, but they saw him as controllable. And then after he went to war with the government in Colombia and all that, they thought, we can't control this kid. He's a maniac. We're going to have to kill him. We'll put someone else in. And so they were suddenly offended by all these murders and his drug trafficking and all that kind of stuff. We'll have to go down there and sort it out. So they did. They went down there, flushed him out onto a roof and shot him and killed him and left him there for everyone to see. And that is what they did. They left him there. And there were people coming up to the DEA, the CIA, the military. Get him off the roof. This is horrible. No, he's staying there as a lesson to everybody else. don't think you're going to be the next Pablo Escobar. We'll find one and put him in charge, you know. So Pablo Escobar, yeah, one of the most famous names in crime in the 20th century, apparently worth about $4 billion at the time of his, at the height of his power. How you calculate Pablo Escobar's money is beyond me, but maybe it's possible. So $4 billion he managed to accumulate from drugs, crime, and incredible violence and massive power in America. Because if you got money from if you got drugs from somebody who got it from somebody who got it from Pablo Escobar and you didn't pay, you get the Colombians coming into New York and just shooting people up. So yeah, he's non-American. This is the thing. We're looking. The first few I'm going to look at, they're not Americans. We're not just going, oh, these Americans, look at them gangsters. No, there are a lot of American gangsters and a lot of gangs in America. So these are not, you know, Americans, basically. So the next one is Toto Reina. And Toto Reina is from Corleone. And if you recognize the name Corleone, it's obviously the name of the Godfather. Vito Corleone. And then Michael Corleone. And Corleone is a real place in Sicily. And it's a town and it's notorious, world famous for vendettas, you know. I mean, they were having a murder every 3 days at one point in this little town, you know, in Sicily. And what happened was, after in the Second World War, I'm not going to go too far back for this, but Mussolini locked up all the mafia dons in Sicily because they were too powerful. So he locked them all up and he put them all in prison. And then the Americans, with the help of Lucky Luciano, who was in prison in America at the time looking at life, they invaded Sicily to use that as a base to attack Italy that was allied with the Germans, which is what they did. And they went in, conquered Sicily in 45 minutes, and the first thing they did was release all the mafiosi, I think it might be in plural, and literally put them in charge of regions. So they took complete control of the island then. It was mafia-owned in the south of Italy as well, particularly. Mafia-owned. And the Americans, you know, they certainly contributed to that, and they were helped by a mafia don to do it. Charles Lucky Luciano, collaborated with them in that mission. And he was then released from prison, went back to Sicily, he was extradited, and he became one of the biggest drug traffickers in the world. But through all this melee of struggle for power in Sicily between the different rival factions and families and all that, came a guy called Toto Reina, who was particularly vicious, brutal, violent, and more than anything else, clever. But, well, I would say above clever, it's kind of ruthless. Somewhat a mixture of ruthlessness and streetwise intelligence, you know. And he became the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses. And his nickname was the Beast. Now, if you're able even to operate in the Sicilian underworld, you're already quite hard, aren't you? You know what I mean? You're not scared of getting shot multiple times or your car getting blown up, because those are the stakes in that game. So you're dealing with people like that. They wipe your whole family out. And they call you the Beast. So when people like that are calling you the Beast, it's because you're a tremendously violent individual. And he was being investigated. The whole thing, his whole regime, really, is what it was. His whole regime in Sicily was being investigated by some very brave men. And one of them was a guy called Falcone. He was a prosecutor. And the reason was that the mafia had too much power, and they'd become a global hub, a mecca, an epicenter for drug distribution, particularly heroin. And Toto Reina was at the pinnacle of that. And so Falcone and some of his associates, but mainly Falcone, was the only one who had the NADS, which is an abbreviation of gonads, to go after the mafia, especially Toto Reina. And Falcone's heavily protected, so he's driving along the motorway, the A29. He's driving along it, minding his own business, trying to get to court to do his job. And because they couldn't get close enough to his car to put a car bomb on it because it was so heavily guarded, they blew up the road. The road that he's driving on, right? I don't know how they did it, but there was dynamite, there was bombs, whatever, and they blew the road up and killed everyone on it, including Falcone. So, I mean, this is next level. Even the American mafia don't do that. If they can't get you, they can't get you. You'll just be in danger for the rest of your life. They don't blow up roads. And you know, with no idea who else is on the road and no desire to find out. That's serious, serious gangsterism there. And the guy died, unfortunately. And then through that appeared Tortorina in the press because he got arrested eventually and he was revealed to the world. Who is this guy? And he looks like a baker or, you know, maybe a butcher. And he was a butcher, but the kind of butcher who has a shop. He did not look in any way like what he was. And people were shocked to see the way he looked, just like a normal guy. But that's part of his magic. You can walk down any street and no one's going to look at him. And he's on his way to chop someone up. And then, you know, the way he was captured, it was all very suspicious. The whole thing looks like he was, in many ways, a kind of sacrificial lamb. There were people, various interests in from other members of the mafia that felt that he was too powerful now, and that they obviously were working with people in the Italian judicial system. They had police officers, they had politicians, you know, all these kind of machinations, and it looked like some of these forces came together to get the beast behind bars, which is what they did. So now I'm going to fly across the world, back to England, to the capital of England, which is London, as I'm sure you know, and look at the Krays. Now, I know that's plural, and the rest are all single, but these, I know there were two people, two distinct persons, Ronald and Reginald, or Ronnie and Reggie Kray, but they were twins, and they were identical. If you see them later in life, you think you would think, no, they're not. But it was because Ronnie was on steroids, so his face got big. But really, they were identical. And they operated completely as a unit. When you see them as young guys, they are identical. And they operated as a unit, and they were just, I mean, they had guns, they used guns, but they preferred, you know, up close and personal, machete in the mouth type violence, which is what they did. They used to call it a Chelsea smile or a Chelsea grin, where they'd open your mouth here like that, you know, and leave you with scars like the Joker. So that's violent, you know, and there are films about the Krays. There are two. There's one called The Krays from the 80s, which is a great film, and there's another one that was made much later, starring Tom Hardy, which is called Legend. The original, as always, is better than the other one. So the later one. So they were boxers originally, good boxers, and that's quite typical. They came up in the East End of London post-war, very rough, very dangerous, and they were very hard. And through that, then became gangsters. They were the younger brothers of an existing semi-gangster, their older brother, Charlie. Charlie Kray was decent, well-respected semi-gangster, but they were proper. But they became famous. They were in the public eye, you see. They were like the Bad Beatles. They were trendy. Everyone wanted to be seen with them. Everyone was out in Soho, all the celebrities, your Barbara Windsors and people like that, famous in their day, trying to be seen with the Krays. You know, this is what it was all about. It was glamorous. There were Richardsons. The Richardsons were down in South London, made a lot more money than the Krays, but they kept it on the down low. They didn't want to be out there in the public eye, and so many people didn't even know they existed, but they had a vast criminal empire, and they were far more brutal than the Krays as well. But the Krays wanted the limelight. They wanted to be famous, and they were. And they got a bit carried away with that because eventually they got arrested, killed a couple of people, shot him in the head. There's so many different versions of what went on. Well, they did one murder each, and then they both went to prison for 30 years, and never got out. One died in prison. I think the other one might still be knocking about a little bit. So, the American Mafia. Let's fly through these guys. We've got, surprisingly to many, I would assume, that many people wouldn't expect me to choose this guy. Joe Colombo. Now, you say Colombo, people think, just one more question. But that's spelt Columbo. This is spelt Colombo, Colombo. More close to Columbus, Christopher Columbus. It's an Italian name, obviously. And Joe Colombo, who was that? Well, he was, at one time, the boss of the Colombo crime family. He didn't start it. He didn't originate it. Before that, it was called the Pravacci family. But he rose through the ranks. And then when Joe Pravacci died, and Joe Colombo became the official boss, they changed the name and made it the Colombo crime family, which is what they do sometimes. And Joe Colombo, as a young hoodlum, was a prolific hitman. I think they gave him, he was credited with 27 hits. And he was very, very effective. He didn't look the part. I think that's, a lot of these guys just don't look like what they are. That's what makes them so dangerous. So Joe Colombo becomes the boss of a New York crime family, one of the 5 families, and it becomes the Colombo crime family. And at this time, they were trying to make, they being the people who made the Godfather movie, they were trying to make it in New York so it'd be as authentic as possible. And the Mafia didn't want this. They didn't want the attention from it. And Joe Colombo, in particular, was offended by it, didn't like it. And he put stickers in windows and all that. Do not allow these people to film outside your business or inside your business. There will be consequences. So the makers of the film, the producers of the film, went with their asses in their hands to Joe Colombo to try and see if there was some kind of way around this. And Joe Colombo was adamant, you're not making a film about the Mafia. It's not happening. And you're certainly not doing it outside my house, in New York City. And the Mafia can close New York City down anytime they want because they control all the unions. So it's impossible to make a movie in New York if the Mafia say you're not making it. And that's before they start killing people. So they went and they had meetings with him and they conned him, really. They agreed to take the word Mafia out of the film. And he thought that was a massive kind of coup for him. But the word Mafia only appeared in the script twice anyway. And it wasn't really necessary. So they just didn't say Mafia in the film, The Godfather, and they were allowed to carry on. And curiously, that became like the beginner's guide to being a gangster. People watched that film to learn how to be an Italian gangster. So it's art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life, So he did stop it for a while, but eventually the movie was made. But during all this, he ran afoul of Crazy Joe Gallo, 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 one of the Gallo brothers. And he was the main one, Crazy Joe, and he became the archetype for all gangsters. He testified in front of a lot of politicians, one of these hearings, and he's wearing the shades and he's smoking, and people thought, oh my God, look at the gangster. He is scary, and he was scary. And he kind of put a mafia fatwa out on Joe Colombo, wanted him dead, didn't think he was qualified for the position, etc. But he was the boss. It was the Colombo crime family, so there wasn't a lot he could do about it. Now, what Colombo did wrong, the mistake that Colombo made, was that he went into politics, right? And he started the Italian-American League, community, no, what's it called? It was the Civil Rights, Italian-American Civil Rights League, it was called. It's hard to remember that acronym. Italian-American Civil Rights League. So it's much like the Martin Luther King movement, but for Italian Americans. And major beef with the movie peeps was that they were portraying Italians as gangsters, as mafiosos, you know. Um, and he was deeply offended by that and highly political, and he started this movement, this league. But of course, the irony was that Joe Colombo himself was not only a gangster, but the head of the Colombo crime family, and became extremely visible as such. Look at this mob boss going on about, you know, stereotypes. I mean, I think he's probably absolutely right, but he was just the wrong messenger, you know. And so he had the right message, but he couldn't see that he himself was the wrong messenger, or he doesn't want to see that. And so he brought a lot of attention onto the mafia and made himself unpopular, and particularly with Joe Gallo. But it was only when he started the civil rights movement that he got killed, right? And what happened? He got publicly executed. He got shot dead in public. This is a leader of a civil rights movement. This is now a political revolutionary, Joe Colombo, representing a minority who gets shot dead in public. So, 1963, John F. Kennedy shot dead in public. 1965, Malcolm X shot dead in public. 1968, Martin Luther King and then Robert Kennedy both shot dead in public. 1971, Joe Colombo, leader of the Italian-American Civil Rights Movement, shot dead in public. Come on, you're taking the piss. We know what you're doing. So it was only when he got involved in politics that he was shot dead in public by, again, surprise, surprise, a lone gunman with no connection to the victim and no experience of that kind of crime at all. So, you know, the old bullshit alert for that one, he was definitely taken out as a potential problem for the powers that be. Staying with the mafia, we're going to rock someone totally different. Roy DeMeo, New York. Oh, these three are all from New York. I'm going to do three. Roy DeMeo, he was unusual, to say the least. That's why he's on the list. So Roy DeMeo, middle-class family, several members of his family were very successful, surgeons and lawyers and things like that. But he never went down that road, but he was bright. And he got involved in crime, became good at it. He was vicious, psychotic, maniac. But he was also very intelligent. He was a tremendous entrepreneur. I mean, he really was. He was like Fortune 500, quality entrepreneur. He had a business flair. He could make money out of anything, and lots of it. Made millions from stolen cars. And he managed to get himself appointed to the board of a bank. I can't remember the name of the bank. It's not that important. But it was a small bank, but it's still a bank. And he got himself appointed to a power position on the board of directors of the bank. Then he rinsed the bank out, and it went bankrupt, and he just walked away. Just walked away from it. Bye-bye bank, and carried on and became more of a gangster. He got made. He became a made man in the mafia, working directly for Nino Gaggi, who worked directly for the man we're going to talk about next, which is Carlo Gambino. So he was extremely intelligent. As I say, he was an entrepreneur. He was a gangster. But for me, the most interesting thing about Roy DeMeo was that he was a serial killer. If you've ever seen Dexter, you've got a serial killer with a job, all right? His job is he's a blood splatter analyst, so he's involved in things that give him access to what he needs in order to be a successful serial killer. Roy DeMeo was the same. He used his position in the mafia to find targets, and he just killed people because killing people is good for him. So what he used to do was invite people round to the Gemini Lounge. I think it was called the Lounge. It was Gemini Club, Gemini Lounge. And that was his bar, Roy DeMeo's bar. And people used to go around there for parties and all that. And sometimes people just got killed. So when you walk through the door, Roy DeMeo would shoot you in the head, right? And wrap a towel around your head to contain the bleeding. And this lad that worked for him called Chris, who called himself Chris DeMeo, he'd jump out in his underpants because he didn't like getting blood on his clothes and stab you in the heart to stop the blood from pumping, and then they'd swing you upside down and hang you upside down over the bath for 40 minutes, and then they'd chop you up, put you in bags and chuck you in the bins. So the only difference between these guys and Dexter is that, you know, they put you in bins, not in the ocean. But yeah, he was a mad, crazy serial killer. And there's one story told by a cop called Joe Coffey about how they were chopping people up, and when they, in the middle of it, they just stopped and started eating pizza with bloody hands. To give you an idea of the mentality of these people, and then carried on chopping up the victim. And they, by all estimates, Roy DeMeo killed about 1,000 people and just disappeared them. And their motto was no body, no crime. But he got in trouble with the Cubans because this Chris, who I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, made a deal with the Cubans. He decided to kill a couple of the Cubans and steal the drugs. Don't fuck with the Cubans. Don't even think about it. Especially when you're not a made man, which this Chris wasn't. He wasn't even Italian. So this put a lot of pressure on Roy DeMeo. Roy DeMeo became extremely paranoid and attacked just a Latin-looking guy that was outside his house. He was a salesman. I think he was a vacuum cleaner salesman. And Roy DeMeo ran out of the house, and this guy jumped in his car, seeing Roy DeMeo come in, jumped in his car, drove off. Roy DeMeo's not on his own. They're driving down the street, and Roy DeMeo is shooting at him. They chased him down and killed him. So obviously Roy DeMeo then, he was off the hook in that sense that he was out of control and he had to be dealt with. He had to be neutralized. And in the same way as I maintain, I say that the CIA or Associated Forces took Pablo Escobar out because he was becoming too much trouble. The mafia did the same with Roy DeMeo, and DeMeo was found in a boot. But they didn't kill him because he was a psychopathic serial killer. They did it because he was drawing too much attention to the mob, especially from the Cubans, who they didn't really want to go to war with. Decisions being made by a guy called Carlo Gambino. So this is the next one. Now we're talking about Carlo Gambino. I say from New York. He was born in Sicily, but he was a New York gangster. So he grows up in Sicily, very dapper, very intelligent, not a thug, but highly violent, extremely violent man. And he goes to America, not exactly as a kid like a lot of them did. He was a teenager. And when he got there, because of his heritage, he was received as a prince. They received him as royalty, the mafia, because he was part of one of these old mafia families. And so he grows up in the mafia, and he becomes the underboss to the Lord High Executioner, Albert Anastasia. And it's one of the most famous mafia hits of all time. Albert Anastasia goes into the barber shop and they're shaving him and all that, and they're putting the hot towel over his face and all that. And then the Gallo brothers, who I mentioned previously, this is what I think. I think it was the Gallos. They went in there and shot him up, and he actually attacked his own reflection in the mirror. When he started shooting him, he was so disoriented that he attacked the mirror. And it was his own reflection. And he fell back and landed on the floor with the towel over his face, or somebody maybe put the towel over his face. And the photos were taken, and that was that for the Lord High Executioner, Albert Anastasia. Very scary man. And so the new boss is Carlo Gambino, and it becomes the Gambino crime family at that point. And Carlo Gambino was a criminal mastermind, and he became the leader. Well, he turned the Gambino family into the biggest crime entity in the United States, one of the biggest crime entities in the world. Had a lot of people killed, and he had his fingers in every possible pie. But if you saw him in the street, if you saw Carlo Gambino buying some bread, you wouldn't look twice at the man. Not when he was at the height of his power. He looked like a little old man on his way to feed the birds. He's probably had 20 people killed that day, directly and indirectly. And he used to order hits like this. And that's it, you're dead. Because Carlo Gambino pulled a face. So there's actually a story of this. There was a guy called Mimi, who as his nickname, Mimi. And he was the boss. Well, he was a captain, but he was in charge of Coney Island. Huge area. Lots of money being made, and he's got 30 guys working for him, and they've got 30 guys working for them. So he's a major player. He's a captain in the Gambino family, Mimi. but he used to get pissed. Right? He was a pisshead. So he'd be in the pub drinking, and when he was pissed, he'd say anything to anybody. So Carlo Gambino walks in with some people, and it's a restaurant. It's Carlo Gambino. So as little and old as he was at the time, and this Mimi was a big, powerful man, and he said, "Hey, Carlo, you look like a jerk," like that. And Carlo Gambino just walked past him, looked at him, and a couple of days later, Mimi was dead. Right? Because it was decided that this Mimi didn't have respect. He had disrespected Carlo Gambino, and he was executed for it. And what's even more terrifying is that two guys who worked for Mimi, they all loved Mimi, made a lot of money with him. Two guys who work with Mimi, they're in a restaurant and they've had a few drinks and they're just talking to each other and they're saying, we really should do something about this. You know, there's a guy known as Charlie Moose. Everyone knew who'd done it, that killed Mimi. Everyone knew that. And so they said, we need to do something about this Mimi situation. It's really not good. It's really, out of order. Anyway, the owner of the bar hears this conversation, makes a phone call. These two guys finish, they pay, they walk out, they go to the car, they get in the car, rat-a-tat-tat through the windows, and these guys are executed bloodbath style in the car outside the restaurant just for suggesting that they might do something about it. Don't even say it, you get dead in less than a couple of minutes because Carlo Gambino is everywhere. And so that's the power of the man. Now we're going to finish with the best in the world, the Irish. Yes, I'm from Manchester, but I'm Irish Mancunian. It means that all my family are Irish, and while we interact, we do have an Irish community. So when you're Irish, and you know that if you are. So we're talking first about Jimmy Burke. Jimmy Burke was one of the most powerful gangsters at his height, at the height of his power in New York, but he wasn't Italian, and he was in the mafia without being an official member. And he's kind of, in one way, super famous, and in another way, totally anonymous because of his name. He was born in New York as Jimmy Conway, right? But he went through the foster system. He was sexually and physically abused in horrible ways. And to the point, one of his foster fathers was very abusive and was turning around shouting at Jimmy. He was just a kid in the back of the car, and he crashed the car and killed him and died. Do you know what I mean? Kill himself, but he caused his own death by shouting at the kid in the back of the car, which was Jimmy. And then Jimmy went to another foster home where he was given the name Burke. He went from Conway to Burke at that point, and they treated him fairly well, but he was into crime, went to jail, came back out, had to get a job because he was on bail, he was on probation, and he did. He worked in the construction industry and turned into a monster. And he was a big, powerful man, physical beast, absolutely, terrifying human being. And he got onto the police radar because his girlfriend's ex pissed him off. And he waited a year, went back on the day before he was getting married. So Jimmy's marrying this girl. He goes to see her ex that had said some shit a year before. And he doesn't kill him before he gets the chainsaw out. He kills him with the chainsaw. That's how he killed him, by chopping bits off him until he was dead. And this is a big, powerful man. He doesn't need a chainsaw. He's doing it because he likes it. So that put him on the radar of the police, and they realised that this guy is not to be trifled with at all. And he then became known as Jimmy the Gent because he completely controlled Kennedy Airport. So he had people working in there that owed him money because he ran illegal gambling rackets and all that, and they'd go to the bar across the road from the airport, which he owned, and he would give them loans and he'd let them gamble, and when they owed money they had to pay, and if they couldn't pay, well, give us some information. So they'd say, right, well, there's a truck containing tobacco or whatever leaving the airport at this time, just hijack it. So they would, and they did it all the time. And this is where you start to get into the immortalization of Jimmy, because he was played by Robert De Niro in the film Goodfellas as Jimmy Conway. And you'll see, if you watch the film, he gets the guy's wallet and he puts money in it. All right, very nice, no violence, put the money in it, but he takes the wallet, the driver's license, and says, you might know who we are, but we know who you are. And puts it back in the wallet and gives him the wallet. And he's Jimmy the Gent. He's a psychotic bastard who chops people up with chainsaws. But yet he's known as Jimmy the Gent. Only the Irish can do that. Only the Irish can get known as Jimmy the Gent while chopping people up with chainsaws and ordering murders all over the place. And that's what they did. And they did the Lufthansa heist. It's in the film. They got 6 million. And so Jimmy decides that too many people know. And he systematically goes around and kills up the people that he did the job with. And, of course, everyone's running scared. And this is why, in the end, Henry Hill, who's a real person, who's the star of the film and the source of the information for it, he became a government witness, a rat, went into the witness protection program, and it was his testimony, amongst other things, that basically formed the script of the film Goodfellas, with Tommy DeSimone, Henry Hill, and Jimmy Burke, or Jimmy Conway, as they call him in the film. But I'm telling you now, Jimmy Burke's a shitload scarier than Robert De Niro, and at least twice his size. So yeah, Jimmy Burke, Jimmy the Gent who kills you with a chainsaw. All right, very Irish. Now, Danny Greene. Who's Danny? Well, Danny Greene's even more Irish. This man was called Greene. He wore green. Everything about him was green. His car was green. His flat was green. Everything was green. Where did he come from? He came from Cleveland, Ohio. So Danny grows up rough. He's got no parents, really. He's just a street kid, really bad. No chance in life at all. But what he could do was fight. He was a brutal fighter. Nearly killed a kid when he was only about 12 or something like that. Nearly beat him to death. And, I mean, we all had fights growing up, but you don't nearly beat people to death when you're 12 normally. Anyway, he was very intelligent, very charismatic, but highly dangerous. So this is a very Irish thing. You know, come in, we'll play the fiddle, but don't fuck about because we'll kill you. So he becomes a Marine. He joins the Marine, gets some order in his life, does him good, comes out, becomes a union leader, totally corrupt union leader of the docks, the longshoremen, and he's brutal about it, and he has complete and total domination of the union, and is utterly corrupt. But everyone loves him anyway, and then at some point becomes an FBI informant, starts informing on everybody, and everybody knew he was an FBI informant, and he moved into different areas of Cleveland, like Collingwood, which were mixed of Irish and Italian, but especially in the Irish community, everyone loved him because no trouble came. Even the mafia wouldn't go into the areas where Danny Greene lived, because Danny Greene would come walking up the street with a shotgun. You know, he was a proper gangster, and he actually went to some bikers that were causing trouble, and he had got the dynamite out, and he's standing on the doorstep, and he lit the fuse, and he's letting it burn down. And they just, shit the pants and said, all right, you're clearly a psycho. And he took the fuse out and threw it and said, you better be gone by next week, which they were. So he was a local hero, really. Very much so, a Robin Hood. He gave all his money away, never made any money. Gave all his money to the community, all of it. It wasn't about that. It was about destroying the mafia, taking the mafia down. And that's what he did. He went to war with the mafia in Cleveland. And they tried everything to kill him. They bombed his house. His house collapsed. And him and his girlfriend who were in bed, they landed on the fridge. Not a scratch. Danny Greene, not a scratch. They bombed his car. He bombed his own car. He was fucking about with a bomb in his car, and he realised, oh shit, this is going to blow up. So he threw it, and it bounced off the window and landed in the car. And he had to dive out of the car, and the bomb itself actually threw him out of the car. So he didn't die. And I mean, this is a guy, they tried to shoot him, and he just returned fire and shot the guy in the head, even though he was in a car. He was unkillable, and they went down to his house. The press went down there to interview him, down at the Shamrock Club and all that, and he had his caravan there that he was living in because they blew up his house. And he's saying, I'm not hard to find. If you want to kill me, come down here. I'm Danny Greene. This is where I live. Come and get me. He used to sit on the porch in his vest, daring the mafia to come and get him, and they wouldn't, and they couldn't. And he got a guy called John Nardi, who was a member of the mafia, and they teamed up and went to war with the rest of the mafia in Cleveland. And it was bomb central. It's the bomb capital of the world. There were bombs going off every few days. And I don't mean sparklers. I mean fucking boom. You know, destroying buildings, blowing up cars. Very, very serious. Very, very loud. And this went on for a long time. And Danny Greene never did a day in jail for any of this. Why? Because as we'll see in the next case, he was a member of the Top Echelon program. So the FBI had a program called the Top Echelon Informers program. So if you were an informant in the Top Echelon program, you could not be touched. Local, state police, whatever, they can't touch you. Do whatever you want. No, you're protected under the Top Echelon program because you are giving them information which is more valuable than the crimes you are committing, in whatever way you want to phrase that. And so he was given free rein to do whatever he wanted, Danny Greene, up to and including bombs in residential areas, which he did. And so the mafia brought in a guy called Ray Ferrito, who's an assassin, a professional killer, professional assassin from Los Angeles, from the mob down there in Los Angeles. And he came up, stalked him, bugged his phones. I mean, the proper professional killer. And he eventually put a bomb on a car next to Danny Greene's car, so that when Danny Greene tried to get in his car, they blew up the car next to his and literally blew him to bits. If you want to see the pictures, you can. I've seen them. Don't like them. Horrible. They literally blew him to bits. But that caused a chain reaction. So now they put a task force together. Now that Danny Greene's dead, the top echelon guy, top echelon program, as soon as he's dead, right, now the FBI get involved. Now there's a task force. And then they just round up all the mafia bosses in Cleveland and arrest them all. And they all started testifying against each other. And this went nationwide. People went, what, you can just testify against someone else and get out of jail? Honestly. And they all started doing it. I mean, it had been done before, but it really took off, became trendy. And a lot of people say that Danny Greene caused the downfall of the mafia as it was then. And he got his way. He certainly destroyed the mafia in Cleveland, which was his lifelong goal. And he achieved it after his death. So call that what you want. That's just what it is. Happy, sad, I don't know. But that's what happened. So the final case today is my personal favourite, another typical Irishman, apart from the criminality. We're not criminals, but this guy was. Whitey Bulger from Boston. And he was from an area of Boston called Southie, which, as you might detect, is in the south of Boston. It's the southern part of Boston. Very poor Irish ghetto, basically. Irish-American ghetto. And he's a petty criminal, but a local hard case. Good-looking guy, piercing blue eyes and really blonde hair, and that's why they called him Whitey. So he's well known in the area, and he sees a young lad called John Connolly in a fight, getting his ass kicked. And he steps in, slap, slap, what's my name? You know? And the kid runs off going, Whitey Bulger, and never comes back. So John Connolly hero worships Whitey Bulger from this point onwards, and I mean that. So he goes to prison at one point, our friend Whitey, and they transfer him to Alcatraz. He had done nothing at this point to warrant being transferred to Alcatraz, a hellhole on literally on an island. So they transfer him there, and he's on Alcatraz. All right, brilliant. This is at the time of the MK Ultra experiments and mind control, and they absolutely, definitely did these experiments to Whitey Bulger. It's documented, just like they did with Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, just like they did with Charles Manson. They also did it with Whitey Bulger. So he goes in a small-time criminal from an Irish ghetto in Boston and comes out a criminal mastermind. And it starts to rapidly take over the underworld in Boston, which is not easy to do. You know, these are proper gangsters. They got the Winter Hill mob and all that. These are serious people. So you've got the Irish old school gangs, but then you've got the Italian mafia, mainly in the northern end of Boston, who are part of the mafia. You know, but he's not bothered. He's not bothered. So what he does is he comes out. He's a maniac killer, killing loads of people, into everything, multi-millionaire. he becomes like a folk story, a folk hero to many in the Irish community and in the criminal underworld. And very anti-grass, anti-rat, brutally. But he was on the payroll. He was an FBI informant from day one, just like Danny Greene. And he was also in the top echelon program, which I'll come back to later. So he comes out criminal mastermind, and he finds himself he's between the Irish mobs, the Italian mob, the FBI, and the IRA, because he's Irish American, and he's supporting the IRA and the struggle in Ulster to liberate that portion of Ireland from the Brits, which is a lot more complicated than that. But that's what they wanted to do. And so at one point, they actually gave Whitey Bulger and his associates gave 7 tons of weapons. Now, when you're measuring the weapons in tons, there's not in numbers of guns and bullets. It's tons. You weigh it. That's how much it was. Grenades, rocket launchers, whatever you want. 7 tons, and they put it on a boat called the Valhalla, and tried to take that to Ireland. And they got busted by the Irish cops. The Irish military got involved, unloaded it, massive bust. Oh my God, well, 7 tons of guns and ammunition that was intended for the IRA, but it never got there. And the guy who was actually driving the boat, I think he'd drive a boat of that size, he returned to America, curiously enough, and was killed by Whitey Bulger in a brutal way. Shot him in the head, then shot him again another 5 times. Now, every time the local police and the state police tried to get anywhere near Whitey Bulger, they couldn't. The investigations were kiboshed by the FBI. He was protected by the FBI, and all law enforcement, local, whether it's Boston or Massachusetts, they all knew this. Even members of the FBI knew this. They were going up there and kicking ass and saying, "What's going on with this Whitey Bulger? He's not giving us any information about the mafia, and he's just killing people left and right and doing whatever he wants. What's going on?" And it was because he was playing the FBI. He was controlling them, and he was also playing the mafia. So he's giving bits of information to the FBI here and there. And he's also making the mafia think that he works for them, but he doesn't. He's controlling them from above through the FBI. So this is a proper criminal mastermind we're talking about here. He's playing the mafia, he's playing the FBI, and his brother at all this, through all this is Billy Bulger, who was a very prominent politician in Boston and Massachusetts. And, he had a problem in the end because he was unable to explain how he didn't know that his brother was a criminal kingpin. Even though his brother still lived in Southie, and Whitey Bulger was a legend in Southie for exactly that reason. And yet somehow Billy Bulger didn't know that. And he had to give testimony about it and completely failed to explain how that was possible and had to retire from politics. But yes, Whitey Bulger, as I said before, was a top echelon informant. And he was working for, apparently, a guy called Connolly, the guy I mentioned earlier, John Connolly, who was younger than Whitey Bulger and was protected by Whitey Bulger as a kid. And he basically worked for Whitey Bulger. He was an employee of Whitey Bulger. And so was his boss, who's a guy called Morris, also John Morris. And they were employees of Whitey Bulger, high-ranking FBI special agents and supervising agents working for Whitey Bulger, keeping him out on the streets, doing what he was doing, which a lot of the time was absolutely horrible. So this all goes tits up. John Connolly goes to prison, right, for his criminal activities, for all kinds of things, racketeering and all this. So he went to jail, John Connolly, the FBI agent. But Whitey Bulger didn't. He escaped. He's round the world. He's been seen everywhere. He's number 2 on the FBI most wanted list, behind Osama bin Laden. The only person more wanted by the FBI was Osama bin Laden, and this is after 9/11. So that's how much the FBI wanted to catch Whitey Bulger, and they couldn't for years and years. He was a legend. He was on the wind. But eventually they did catch him when he was about 83. They caught him in a car park in America. And they arrested him, and then it came out that he was a grass. He'd been an FBI agent all along. He'd sent loads of people to prison, especially any rivals or whatever. And it was just part of his business, was sending other people to prison. So he ends up going to prison in the end. And normally the story would end there, but it doesn't. Because what happens is he spends a few years in prison. When he gets to 89, they transfer him to a prison which is so bad, it's known by the inmates as Misery Mountain. And these are guys who've been in prisons all over America, penitentiaries, and they call it Misery Mountain. And it's understaffed, intensely bad and dangerous. So they decide to transfer Whitey Bulger to this prison, right? Whitey Bulger arrives at night, and by morning he's dead in his cell. He's been beaten to death and had his eyes gouged out in his wheelchair, right, by a brutal maniac who was known for attacking and in some cases killing grasses. I mean, if he attacked you, he was trying to kill you. That's what he did, or rats, as they say in America. So as soon as it happened, everyone knew, oh, it was this guy. Everyone knew who'd done it. And so the excuse that was given for moving Whitey Bulger to this hellhole was that he was problematic, bad behaviour. So we can deal with the Aryan Brotherhood, right? We can deal with MS-13, we can deal with the Mafia, we can deal with whatever you want to put in here, including the Bloods and the Crips, but we can't deal with the 89-year-old man in a wheelchair. Ooh, that's too much. We'll have to transfer that guy to Misery Mountain and then leave his door open, obviously, and allow this maniac to run in there and brutally murder and vandalise an 89-year-old man in a wheelchair. Day one. Because he was too much trouble. Bullshit. Because he knew too much, and he was saying, well, I'm 89, I'm telling everyone. Right, okay. You're getting transferred, mate. And you won't last a day. Which he didn't. He was dead by morning. So, the only thing I would like to use just to close out the hour, if it's anywhere near an hour, playing it by ear, is that gangsters are not the only players in the game. Gangsters do not operate outside the system. They operate within the system. They operate within the structure of the system. It is impossible to run an organised crime family or organisation of any kind without the complicity of certain people in power. You need politicians, you need police officers, you need straight businessmen and women. You need complicity from the society, from the structure itself, including judges and all that. You need that. So when you look at the Mafia, you don't just see the gangsters, don't just see the guys in the hats. You've got to see the police and the politicians and all the straight businessmen like Donald Trump and all that, who made their money in places like New York and Atlantic City and Chicago, that were absolutely up to their tits in it and remain so to this day. So there are plenty of top players in the underworld who are not in the underworld. They wear ties, and sometimes you see the little bastards on television. And don't forget that. Like, share, and subscribe to the Power Hour. John Lee. Adios. Goodbye, my friends.